Before we get started, a friendly reminder that my videos are not for children. I curse a lot and I make a lot of sexual jokes, and this video is no exception. Alright, on to the video. What's up, fuckers? My name is Alexander Hamilton. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another doll customizing video. I finally got my new computer and I got my new recording setup all underway. Everything's going great. Also, this is my new little desk partner. Everybody say hello to Sebastian the Sad Dragon. Ain't he cute? He's just my little desk buddy. He sits on the desk and keeps me company while I record, and I've decided that he's gonna be in the intro, just up here on my little shoulder. Please pardon the ugly background. I promise I will eventually clear away all these boxes and put my painting back up, but for right now you're gonna have to deal with the boxes and the white wall. Here, also, my hair is red now. Yeah, it's a thing that I did on a whim because I just really like dyeing my hair, and I had blue hair when I started this channel. I've done blue a lot, like a lot, multiple times, so you're like, you know what, just for shits and giggles, I'm gonna do the opposite, and I'm gonna do red. This is so freaking vibrant that it like completely wrecks the color balance on my camera. My like fluorescent lighting with my recording setup is kind of balancing it out. Okay, back to what this video is actually about. Today I will be continuing my Pride Flag Mermaid series and making a fabulous rainbow merman. Quick disclaimer before we get started, I jump around a lot when working on doll projects. I'll work on one part of the doll, then while that part is drying or curing, I switch to another part of the doll. And it's really like jumbled and out of order, so I've switched around the order of things that I did just to make this video easier to follow along with, so please pardon the lack of continuity. Okay, let's get started. Just like last time, I used Monster Girl Maker, not sponsored, to make the concept art. I made this design specifically with a clawed wolf doll in mind for the base, mostly because I really want to work with a clawed, but also because this project is mostly going to be super bright colors, so I thought a darker skin tone would balance the color story and make the bright colors pop a lot more. This is actually kind of ironic considering the state of the world right now because I filmed this back in April. Alright, let's get to the doll. I ordered a second-hand doll off of eBay. I believe this clawed is from the Pack of Trouble line. Unfortunately, this Instagram post is the only pre-customized footage I have because I lost the rest of it. I lost a lot of footage from this project. I loved Monster High as a kid, but I never owned one of their boy dolls. I really like the sculpting on his torso. He's got some really well-defined musculature. I didn't pick up on this for a day or two, but his hands were actually switched around. His right hand was on his left arm and vice versa. Like, I did put them back where they belonged later, off camera. Most of the flocking on his head where his undercut was had fallen off, just leaving a lot of really nasty glue residue. And his right foot and hand looked like they had been a little bit chewed on. There were teeth marks on his foot, and his right hand was missing his fingertips. We don't need his legs for this project, and we can fix the hand later. Right now, let's work on prepping the doll. Unfortunately, I lost all the footage of me prepping the doll for customization, so here's footage of another doll. Let's start by cutting off hair. Use a sharp pair of thread scissors to cut off the hair close to the head. Next, remove the head by dunking it in boiling water until it's nice and squishy. Then use a towel to protect your hand and tug off the head. Next, remove the plugs. Stick an object inside the head and wriggle it around to pull out all the plugs, then tug them out through the neck hole. Next, remove the factory paint with acetone and Q-tips. You could also use acetone-based nail polish remover, but pure acetone works a lot better and it gets the face off a lot faster with a lot less elbow grease. Before I remove the legs, I use them to make a blueprint for the tail by folding a piece of paper in half lengthwise, laying the doll down on top of it, tracing the leg from the top of the hip to the ankle. For my clawed doll, at first I tried to cut off the leg joint, but I couldn't get enough leverage with my knife to cut it, so I decided to just break them off. The legs are designed to easily move outwards, so you just need to apply enough force in the opposite direction to break them off. The leg joint broke clean off of the pelvis and stayed in the leg. Wasn't expecting that. I lined the leg up with the lines that I traced earlier, traced the joint. Then the legs went into the stock box. No idea if I'm actually going to use them in a future project, but hey, maybe I'll figure something out. Back to the blueprint, I sketch out a fin while referencing images of tropical fish, cut it out, trace it on another piece of paper, mark out the size of the tail segments, and it's done. Shifting back to the doll, I use my knife to carve a hole through the pelvis. This will be used to make the articulation for the tail later. Last step in prepping the doll, removing the molded underwear. Sand it off, starting with a rough grain and working down to finer and finer grains until everything is nice and smooth. Okay, now we can get back to Claude. Making doll clothes is my favorite part of customizing, but unfortunately, I also lost all the footage of making his clothes. For his crop top, I used pretty much the exact same steps that I used to make Lafayette's crop top, except that I added a little bit more width to it because I didn't want it to be skin tight, and I sewed a rainbow ribbon across the front. The material that I used for the crop top is stretchy, so it wouldn't fray. But for the vest, I was using denim, which frays a whole heck of a lot, so I painted Elmer's glue all onto the sides of it to keep it from fraying. Let's set it aside for now to work on the doll's body mods. Let's start with his fins. I mark his forearm, and start attempting to drill through with my knife, but this plastic is a lot softer than Lafayette's arms were, and it's a lot more difficult to drill through. But then, with some help from my mom, I found an actual drill! It was a lot easier to get through, but I should have been more careful with it because I broke the drill bit. Good thing I have another. I drill two holes in the forearm, stick a wire through, and form a fin shape. Now let's break out the epoxy sculpt. Mix equal parts A and B, then mush it into the holes and the inside of the forearm to cover and seal in the wire. Once that's cured, I move on to sculpting the fin. I start by filling in and bulking out the general shape, and once that's cured, I move on to cosmetic sculpting. I add a slab of epoxy to the fin and add a scalloped edge to mirror the design of the tail fin. Once that's cured, I add some raised details with some snakes of epoxy. To make his gills, I place an epoxy blob on the side of his neck and blend out the sides, dipping my finger into water to make it easier. Then I use the tip of my knife to cut off the bottom, giving it a sharp edge. Repeat the same steps on the other side, and add 2 more layers of gills once the ones beneath them cure. The last body mod is giving him webbed hands. I attempted to do this with Lafayette, but failed miserably, so hopefully it works this time. I squish epoxy between his fingers, pinching and playing around with the shape until I'm satisfied with it. Once everything's cured, I sanded everything smooth. The webbing was really difficult to sand because of his soft, squishy vinyl hands. I had to pop off the pieces, sand them, and super glue them back on. I attempted to do the exact same thing with Lafayette, but the pieces were so tiny that I immediately lost them. It was a lot easier this time because of how far apart his fingers are. Before we move on to paint, let's cover up his odd lack of fingertips with some nail extensions. I cut some tiny triangular slivers of recycled cereal box cardboard and attach them to the tips of his fingers with cyanoacrylate gel, aka superglue. Then cover them in a few layers of Elmer's glue all to bulk them up and reinforce the nails. Now it's time for paint. I start by painting his gills. I did a little bit better of a job with color matching the paint this time, but it's still not perfect. So I bring the paint down to his collarbone so that the line where the paint ends will be covered by his top. Remember to water down your paint to avoid brush strokes and get an even surface. Once I've layered it up enough that it's fully opaque, I paint hot pink onto the edges of his gills. I also painted the webbing on his hands the exact same hot pink. His nails were also pink in the concept art, but I feel like they would kind of blend in with his pink webbing and you wouldn't be able to tell them apart, so let's paint them black instead to match his shirt and hair. Black pink in your area. I painted his fins hot pink, except for this raised thing on the back, which I painted the skin tone color I mixed up. I planned on painting scales on his arms in the exact same spots I painted the scales on Lafayette's arms. But I feel like if I painted them all hot pink, then there would just be too much pink. I'm trying to keep the pink as just an accent color. So instead, I paint white ovals onto his arms to make the bright colors easier to build up, Then add the rainbow. Once those colors are dry, I paint on a scale texture using slightly darker shades of the same colors. Last thing that needs to be painted on his torso is his crotch, butt, and hip area, which needs to be painted red to match the top segment of his tail. It took a ridiculously long time to make this fully opaque. Everything else took 3 to 5 layers, but with the red, I stopped counting at around 10 layers of paint. Maybe I watered down the paint too much? After all the paint is dry, seal it in with matte varnish. I put 3 coats on most of the painted areas, 6 on areas I know will be easily bumped or hit frequently, and 10 on his nether region, since that'll be rubbing up against the first tail segment, and I really don't want the paint to chip. Speaking of the tail, let's get to work on that. I'm making a ball-jointed tail out of air dry clay just like last time. I take my Sculpey air dry clay and start mixing in my colors. I had orange and magenta left over from making Lafayette's tail, so I didn't have to mix those. After getting all my colors mixed, I wrapped them in plastic wrap and put them in a sandwich bag so they wouldn't dry out. I start by taking my red clay and sculpting a U shape that matches the shape of his pelvis. After that, I move color by color in rainbow order, sculpting fat crescent moon shapes with holes in the bottom. Except for the final segment, which is basically a tiny pinch pot. I let each segment fully dry, then come back with more clay in the same color and add a thin layer over the piece to fill in cracks and smooth out the shape. To make the fin, I cut out the fin from the blueprint to use as a template, put a slab of clay down on this floor tile we use as a cutting board, and roll it out to about 1/4 of an inch thick, which I did with a bottle of booze because I have no idea where my rolling pin is. Once it's all rolled out, I place the template on top and cut it out. The ball joint needs to be strong, so I insert an armature wire. Once everything is dry, I sand it all smooth, which took several days and ended up giving me a very bad head cold because of all the clay dust I was breathing in. After sanding the fin, I added raised details with a few snakes of air dry clay, let it dry, and sand it again. I form the ball shape, make a slot down the middle, then use a thick wire to poke a hole through the ball joint that intersects with the slot. Before it cures, I stick it inside the last segment of the tail to make sure it fits. Once it's cured, it's time for paint. I paint on rainbow colors, working from the outside edge to the middle, then paint the raised parts pink. Last thing to do is complete the ball joint. I take the same thick wire I used to make the hole, stick it in the hole, mark the length, take it out, and cut it. Taking a thinner wire, I make a wire hook with a loop on the end and stick it in the slot. Insert the wire, catching the loop on the end of the hook, and seal it in place with super glue. I accidentally cut the wire too short, so to make sure that it's sealed in place, I super glued on some tiny cardboard squares. To make the articulation, take a thick elastic cord and cut a length of it. It's okay if it's too long, you can always make it shorter. Heat seal the ends and sew them into loops. Thread the cord through the pelvis hole, stick a wire through the loops on the end, and use that to string it through the tail segments. Once you get to the fin, pull the cord through and catch the loops on the end with the hook. I had to do this off camera because it took a second pair of hands to be able to get the elastic on. Remove the wire and the tail is strung. If the elastic doesn't have enough tension, take the tail apart, cut off one of the end loops, sew a new one, restring the tail, and repeat until the elastic has enough tension. With that, we are completely done with his body. Let's work on the head. Cute as they are, his ears need to be removed. I carefully sliced them off with a box cutter. I was unsure of what to do with them. My concept art has fishy fin-like ears, so I could sculpt those out of epoxy, or I could just reposition these ears to the side of his head. I inserted needles into his ears and stuck them on the side of his head just to see how it looked. Not bad, but does it make him look less like a merman? Are they too elf-like? I hopped on a Monster Girl maker just to see how he looked with different ears. I still wasn't 100% certain about it, so I put it up to a vote on my Instagram. Shameless plug. It was pretty close, but you guys voted for his original ears. There's a bit of a gap between the ears and his head, so I filled it in with epoxy. While I have the epoxy out, I sculpted gills onto his cheeks the exact same way I sculpted the ones on his neck. After some sanding, it's time for paint. Initially, I only wanted to paint the epoxy, but my color matching job wasn't perfect, so there was still a pretty obvious line where the paint met the original vinyl head, so I had to paint the whole head. I only did 2 coats, but in hindsight, I should have done 3. On the final doll, the color is still slightly lighter where the epoxy was, but I didn't notice this until I was halfway through the face-up. I covered his ear holes by supergluing on some cotton fabric, then painted on his new hairline with black. When I made Lafayette, the gills bulked up her neck so much I couldn't fit her head back on, so I had to whittle the neck hole wider. So I did the same on this doll, but I accidentally carved off way too much. I got his head on, but the neck hole was so wide that it wouldn't stay on his neck, and it kept popping up and flopping around limply without anything to support the bottom of it, like he had a broken neck. It was really weird and creepy. There was nothing I could really do to fix it, so I just kept going. It still works, I just have to be really careful when posing him. Seal in the paint with 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear. Don't forget your filtration mask, and always wait half an hour to let it fully dry between coats. This stuff is chemical death, and it can seriously fuck up your lungs. Now we can start working on his face. Since I was creating a character from a specific demographic, I had plenty of reference images off-screen on my tablet while drawing his face. I start with a color similar to his skin tone to draw the initial line so I can easily correct any mistakes at the line work stage. I draw on his eyeliner with dark brown, his waterline with light pink and a little bit of red, and rough out the shape of his pupil and eyebrow with the same dark brown, and filled in his sclera with white. In every single image that I found, the men in the photos had a really well-defined lower eyelid crease, so I drew that on with the same dark brown pencil. I started drawing on his eyeshadow colors, then I realized that they would probably be easier to build up if I put down a layer of white first. I did the same on his lips. I went over his eyeliner and eyebrows with black before spraying him with another layer of MSC. I started trying to draw on the second layer when I realized I sprayed on a layer of MSC that was way too thick, and now my pencils can't draw on it. I wasn't planning on having to switch to acrylic paints this early, but plans change. I paint over my initial sketch with the exact same colors. Once the white on his eyelids and lips was opaque and dry, I painted over it with the final colors. Hot pink on his lips and rainbow colors on his eyeshadow. I added a little bit of shading by painting a slightly darker shade of pink in the crease of his lips. I also made him look like he's smiling by painting on the corners of his lips slightly above where they are on the mold. I finished up the acrylic paint stage by adding a pupil and the catch lights to his eyes. One more spray of sealant to add a little more definition to his lower eyelid crease and give him lower eyelashes with a few delicate flicks from a very sharp black pencil. One last spray of MSC and his face-up is done. All that's left are final details, starting with lashes. I just use human falsies from the dollar store. Dollar store lashes work best because of how thin they are. Thicker, higher quality lashes would look ridiculous on doll scale. I cut them into small pieces to make them easier to work with, pick them up with tweezers, and glue them on with some Elmer's glue all. They look a little bit crazy, so give them a trim. One last detail is his face piercings, which I made by sticking sewing pins into his face. I was able to find 2 blue ones for his shark bites, but I couldn't find any red ones, so I painted them red. Moving on to his hair, I marked out where his part will go and where the layers of hair will be glued on. To make his dreadlocks, I take black yarn, hold it up to his head to tell how long to cut it, and cut a metric fuck ton of yarn. I feathered out one end and glued it onto the head, starting at the back and working my way up and around to the part. This took several days, but with the magic of editing, it only takes 30 seconds. I popped off his head because I was going to be rooting the part. In hindsight, I probably should have done this before adding the epoxy modifications to his face, but oh well, live and learn. For the rooted part, I needed a yarn that was twice as long as the rest of it. I bought a rerooting tool a while ago, but I have no idea where it is, so I used the sewing method. I highly recommend checking out Catherine from Delightful's video making her doll Sakura to learn about this in detail. Once the part looked full, I popped the head back on the body. His hair was a lot shorter in the concept art, but you know what? I like the super long dreads. I'm keeping him. Unfortunately, one of his ears had broken loose, but I super glued it back on and covered the crack by painting on sideburns. Last step is his jewelry. In the concept art, his earrings were just regular stars, but I happen to have these starfish beads, and by pure luck, I only have 2 blue ones. To make them into earrings, I take a similar color of embroidery thread, divide it in half from a 6-strand to a 3-strand, string the bead onto it, tie a double knot in the back, hold it up to his ear to gauge how long it needs to be, cut it, and attach it with a dot of super glue. His concept art also had a purple choker and a pink and gold moon headband thing, but I feel like he looks complete without them. Put his clothes back on, and he's done. Just like last time, I asked you guys for name suggestions over on Instagram, and looking over your great suggestions, I narrowed it down to 4 that got suggested the most, or that I disliked the most, and put it up to a vote. Pretty much the same thing happened as last time. I thought that Grayson would win for sure because that name just kept getting suggested over and over again, but the winner by a landslide was Giovanni. Unlike Lafayette, I didn't get any last name suggestions, so I decided to give him the last name Hall, as an homage to Todrick Hall. 1, because I adore his music, and because I reference images of Todrick while drawing his face, so I feel like Giovanni has a little bit of Todrick's DNA inside of him. Wow, that sounded way more sexual out loud than it did in my head. What do you guys think of him? I had a lot of fun making him. Next up in this series is the B in LGBT. I'm super excited for you guys to see my bisexual mermaid. I'm probably most excited for her project. And since according to a poll I did a while ago, over half of my Instagram followers identify as bisexual, so I know they're looking forward to it. If you want to participate in polls and help me with decision making on these and many other projects, follow me on Instagram at Alexander_R._Hamilton. Okay, enough vlogging, roll the outro. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a fantastic day. Be gay, do crime. I love you, bye!